With the Moto G, Motorola is breaking into the budget smartphone market. We've now spent an entire week with this extremely affordable phone. Are there too many sacrifices, or is this phone one that you shouldn't pass up? I'm Taylor Martin, this is Pocketnow, and this is our full review of the Motorola Moto G. We'd also like to thank our pals over at Clove for lending us this Moto G for review. Check out clove.co.uk to see about buying your own Moto G. Considering the price of the Moto G, you can't expect a whole lot out of its hardware. In fact, when we ripped open the box, we expected a cheap, flimsy toy-like phone. Instead, not only does the Moto G look a lot like its more mature sibling, the Moto X, it feels even more substantial in the hand thanks to the additional 13 grams of heft and its slightly thicker build. The hardware is quite nice. Not just because of the tiny price tag, it is genuinely great hardware. It feels a lot like the Moto X in hand. It bears the curved back, which allows the device to center itself in your palm really well. And the ports and buttons are all in the same places. Of course, the insides of this smartphone are more telling of where corners were cut in order to keep costs down. But keeping price in mind, which is impossible not to do with this phone, they're still rather respectable. It's powered by the Snapdragon 400 chipset, a 1.2 GHz quad-core CPU, and Adreno 305 GPU. It comes in either 8 or 16 GB variations, has only 1 GB of RAM, a 5 megapixel rear camera, and a 2070 mAh battery. The price savings are felt through the lack of some features which come standard in most Android smartphones these days: LTE connectivity, NFC, and Wi-Fi AC. The display, surprisingly, isn't bad at all. Measuring 4.5 diagonal inches, it doesn't stretch edge to edge like the display on the Moto X. And also, unlike the Moto X, it's not an AMOLED panel. It's a 720p resolution LCD panel, which boasts fairly accurate and vibrant colors, decent contrast, and very wide viewing angles. Blacks are somewhat washed out, but whites are balanced, and we have very few overall complaints with the display. It's sharp at 326 pixels per inch, and by itself it looks great. Far better than we imagined on a $200 phone. In fact, that's how we feel about this entire device. Every aspect of the Moto G's hardware exceeds our expectations of what a $200 smartphone should feel like. Software is an interesting story on the Moto G. Unlike Motorola's initial claims, the Moto G does not ship with KitKat. The plan is now to update to 4.4 KitKat sometime in January. For now though, it's running 4.3 Jelly Bean, and it's missing the vast majority of the cool features found on the Moto X, mainly due to the hardware requirements. It does not have touchless control or the wrist flick camera shortcut gesture, since those both require Motorola's X8 mobile computing system, and it doesn't have active display notifications, since it requires an AMOLED display to conserve power. But it does offer a few things from Motorola, such as Motorola Assist for calendar meetings or sleeping, not driving, which also requires the X8 computing system. It has Motorola Care, Migrate, and Device ID. And if you use a passcode or pattern lock, when you connect a Bluetooth device, you can add it to your list of trusted devices. When connected to trusted devices, the Moto G will not lock. When they disconnect, the pattern or passcode is required to access the device again. Outside those few add-ons, this version of software is virtually bone stock Android. And that's important on a device like this, since both storage options are rather small. For the time being, we have no complaints when it comes to the software, but we can't wait to see what this phone runs like on KitKat. Performance isn't exactly incredible on the Moto G. The Snapdragon 400 is visibly stuttery at times. To anyone seeking a mostly smooth experience on the cheap, however, it doesn't get better than this on Android at this price. Applications open and switch smoothly and relatively quickly. Flipping between home pages or panning and zooming in the browser is like butter. But the biggest current limitation of the Moto G is its 1 GB of RAM. Applications are closed more aggressively than we're used to with 2 or 3 GB of RAM. We feel the forthcoming KitKat update could make things better in this aspect. Benchmark scores are respectable, and gaming performance isn't anything to scoff at either. This device isn't meant to be a gaming powerhouse, but it can hold its own, even in titles like Asphalt 8. It has a tendency to drop frame rates throughout asphalt races, but it's usually quick to pick up the slack and muscle through and finish the race. The speaker on the backside of the Moto G is fairly loud and quite crisp. It's strong in the mids and highs and light on the lows. This doesn't help for the speakerphone performance, which is laughable. Caller sounded robotic and tinny, often distorting the sound enough to make it difficult to understand. That said, calls through the earpiece sounded great with plenty of volume. The lack of LTE was quite noticeable in web page load times and streaming music. We hit peak speeds at around 5 megabits per second down and 2 megabits per second up, but the average speeds were closer to 2 megabits per second down. The 2070 mAh battery inside the Moto G managed to impress us to some extent. The lack of LTE, Snapdragon 400, and 720p resolution display were likely helpful in the Moto G's stamina, which consistently managed to power us through a full day of moderate to heavy usage. On days of abnormally heavy usage though, we needed a supplementary charge mid-afternoon to last us into the night. The camera is admittedly the low point of the Moto G. Even in the very best lighting conditions, pictures weren't all that impressive. They're dull on colors, lack sufficient detail, and are packed with noise and artifacts. And they're noticeably light on contrast as well. We managed to take a few decent pictures, but they weren't anything mind-blowing. And the instant light becomes the least bit scarce, image quality suffers significantly. There were many sacrifices made in order to make the Moto G. Fortunately, Motorola cut costs in the least intrusive way possible. The Moto G is a fantastic looking and feeling handset at a $300 or $350 price point, but it's only $179 or $199 depending on capacity. And for anyone who might even consider a $200 smartphone as a daily driver to begin with, the Moto G is an absolute steal. It's not for everyone as the stutters and performance reveal, but it's a fantastic option as a stocking stuffer this holiday season for a first-time smartphone buyer or even veterans who don't have a lot of needs or disposable income. It also makes for an ideal backup phone for those dire circumstances. And that's why we give the Moto G a 7.7 out of 10. That's going to wrap up this review, so if you enjoyed it, be sure to click the thumbs up button below and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this one in the future. Leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions, and be sure to follow us in all the usual places, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+ at Pocketnow. Before we go, we'd like to extend a final thank you to our friends at Clove for lending us the review unit. And, as always, I'm Taylor Martin. You can find me on Twitter at CasperTech, and I will see you next time.